Hi everybody, it's Kerry Stead bringing you some more action from the 2013 Australian Open Chess Championships from North Leagues in Cammeray. This video is going to look at the action from round 8, and as usual before we get to the chess itself, we'd like to thank our sponsors: Hancock Prospecting, North Leagues, Ridges North Sydney, Australian Chess Enterprises and Chess Discount Sales. Looking at the games of round 8 in the Australian Open Championships, we had a very dramatic top 2 boards and a very historic moment in Australian chess. Going into the round, we had 3 players tied for the lead, with Bobby Cheng, Igor Kenkin and Max Illingworth all on 6 points. Bobby was playing Igor on board 1, and this is how the game started. It started off as a Slav defense, with Igor employing a semi-Slav and Bobby employing a fairly quiet system with e3 and b3 against it. After bishop b4 check, Bobby blocked with a knight and then brought his bishop to d3, and Igor set up a pawn structure very reminiscent of a Stonewall Dutch. After some more development, Bobby played a3, hitting the bishop on b4. Given that the pawn structure for black has all the pawns on white squares, black really doesn't want to exchange off that dark squared bishop, so it retreated back to d6, which allowed Bobby to continue pushing those queenside pawns with b4. And Henkin then played queen f6, looking to perhaps transfer that queen to the h file and getting some pressure against Bobby's king. Cheng calmly played knight e1, and again, faced with possibly an f4 idea and sort of stymieing any sort of attack that black might be able to generate, Higgins decided to break in the centre with e5. And although in principle it seems like a good move, it has a quite serious drawback that we'll see very shortly. Cheng exchanged on d5 and then brought the other knight from d2 to f3. So obviously he's starting to threaten capturing on e5, so Henkin captured on d4, and after bishop takes d4 we can start to see the problems that Henkin has in this position. The main one being that the d pawn is a quite serious weakness, and it's very difficult for Henkin to defend. So Cheng's going to spend much of the next few moves having blockaded that pawn, continuing to just put pressure on that d5 pawn. Henkin brought the queen back to f7, bishop c2, so that's going to re-maneuver itself to b3 and again put pressure on that d5 pawn. b6 from Henkin, bishop b3 to attack that d5 pawn, and then Henkin played bishop a6, attacking the rook on f1. He Cheng found a very nice tactic: bishop e5, uncovering the queen. So once again, that d5 pawn is a real concern. Obviously with the king and queen lined up, it's obviously a real issue with the diagonal. So we can see that d5 pawn is starting to become a serious problem for Henkin. So he obviously can't take the exchange, as Cheng can simply play bishop takes d5 and win the queen for bishop. He chose to play knight d to f6. That allowed Cheng to just simply defend the rook by putting a knight in the way, knight d3, and again reinforcing that bishop on e5. Also, that knight now from d3 can maneuver to f4 and continue to put pressure on d5, which we'll see in a few moves time. Rook came to c8, the rook got off that diagonal, went to e1, and now Henkin played knight c3. Obviously attacking the queen, but Cheng is more than happy to trade off that knight. Obviously the bishop wasn't really doing that much on e5, and this allows that knight f4 maneuver that I mentioned a few moves ago. Obviously, with all this pressure building up on d5, Henkin then has to exchange on f4, and he then tried rook d3 to defend the queen. Cheng's again calmly just moved it out of the way to b1, and now again there's more issues potentially for Henkin. Not only do you have the bishop on the diagonal of d5, you now have the queen lined up with f5, as well as having a rook on the open e-file. So although temporarily Cheng's had to sort of manoeuvre some pieces to some awkward looking squares, long term there's plenty of pressure for the white pieces. Henkin then played his queen out to h5. Looks very aggressive, and there might be some sort of threats coming at some stage with knight g4, but they're not really anything significant. And this is where Cheng has found another very nice tactic that has actually got him some material. Played pawn to b5, obviously blocking the diagonal for the bishop. If the bishop retreats, queen takes the rook. So here there's really two alternatives. What Henkin played in the game, or giving up the exchange immediately. But rather than taking with the f-pawn, the correct way to do it is to play bishop d1. This keeps the king safe, and after knight g4 you can simply take, and the king's perfectly safe on f1 while that diagonal's closed. So the bishop would have to retreat, simply play something like queen b4, and white's simply in exchange to the good with a very comfortable position. So instead of going for that line, Henkin captured the pawn on b5, and Cheng played the very nice move bishop to d1. Obviously now we're threatening the bishop on b5. The bishop still needs to defend the rook on d3, so he played bishop to c4, and then the point of this combination from Cheng, knight e5. So we've uncovered the bishop on d1 attacking the queen on h5, as well as the knight attacking obviously the rook on d3. This means that Cheng is going to win material of some form or another here, and Henkin decided to give that material away by playing rook takes the bishop on d1. Cheng was happy to trade queens and bring his rook from a1 to the d file, and again there's still that pressure on the d pawn that's been there for the previous 10 or so moves. Henkin got his rook to c8, and Cheng just returned his knight to the nice f3 square, where it can go to maybe g5, d4 or e5, plenty of alternatives, and it's on a very nice square there. The rook came to c7 to prevent the rook coming in on the white rook coming in on e7, but the rook came into e6. Henkin tried knight f7 to remove that rook, but then knight g5 check, and the king's forced to come out to, well, not forced, but pretty much has to come out to g6. Now we can see a further problem for Henkin here. Rook e5, again pressuring those two weak pawns. So right from that early e5 break, when we've had the weak d5 pawn, now we've got problems with the f5 pawn as well, that started with that queen b1 maneuver. And this is the real dilemma for Henkin. Not only is he down in exchange, but he's also got some weak pawns that are very, very difficult to defend. Henkin tried rook c5 to defend. Cheng just moved the knight back to f3, and he played rook a5 attacking that a3 pawn. Again, simple defense from Cheng, rook a1, and then the move that really started sort of the final nails in the coffin for Henkin here, bishop d3. Looks like a natural sort of move if he can find a way to get that bishop on e4 and maybe even exchange it off for that knight. There might be some chances to hold the position. But first Cheng plays rook e7, so obviously there's threats of knight e5 forking the king and the bishop, and obviously if you play bishop e4 then you can simply throw in the knight check in f3, and the bishop's again got to retreat to a square that doesn't want to go to. A better option than what Henkin played might have been knight h5, but still there's plenty of pressure here for Cheng, starting with knight g5. Again, the bishop can return to b5 and then knight e6, and then we're going to have problems again with the g pawn, with also potential mating ideas, which we'll see come up in a little while. However, from here Henkin immediately moves his bishop back to b5. Problem with this is that it drops the f pawn, and again another key defensive piece there for Henkin disappears with knight h4. King goes to h5, knight captures on f5, then Henkin plays g6. Knight returns to a central position on d4. Henkin tries to bring his bishop back to d3 to help with the defense, and here Cheng actually played maybe a slightly inaccurate move. In this position, rook f7 is a very, very nice move, and pretty much wins. The issue here is if he tries a move like, say, rook a4, knight e6, and once the knight moves, rook h7 is going to be a very, very quick death for the visiting grandmaster in that position. And alternatively, if the knight moves immediately, say to a square like e4, then again simply take on h7, and then just to settle the mating net, just play simple move like g3. And there's obviously rook h4 is very, very difficult to stop. So I say knight takes, and then simply rook h3, or if the f pawn isn't taken and you make another move, even a move like say a6, then simply h3 is checkmate as well. So there's multiple mating ideas there for Cheng because of the poor position of the black king. But returning to the game, instead of playing rook f7, which might have finished things off slightly quicker, Cheng, again working on this mating net idea, played pawn to h3, just trying to cut off the king's access to the g file. So obviously the f pawn is covering the g5 square. Now the h pawn is covering the g4 square, and the big problem here is that this king really doesn't have many squares to maneuver to. Obviously we've got the knight on d4 that can very easily come back towards the king. We've got the rook that can go to the h file, so there's plenty of attacking opportunities for Cheng in this position, and it makes it very difficult for Henkin to defend his king. He tried rook a4, the knight jumped into the very nice square e6, and then rook e4 as a defensive maneuver, trying to exploit that pin. Cheng, again, very nice, very calm play. Rook d1 attacking the bishop. Obviously if the bishop moves and does not defend the d5 pawn, there might be ideas of rook takes d5 at some stage, as well as other ideas of maybe g4 and the like. The bishop came back to c4, and then g4 check. The king is pretty much forced to go to h4. Obviously if it goes back to h6, there's simply g5 check, winning the knight, which is going to be game over. And now another very calm move, king to g1, just calmly defending that h3 pawn, tightening that that noose around the neck of the king in that position. Henkin tried h5, and another very nice move by Cheng. Knight comes back to d4, so obviously threatening an immediate knight f3 mate, and it's really very, very difficult for Henkin to survive this. In fact, the best defense here, not what Henkin played in the game, but actually the best defense is trying bishop f1 check. Regardless of how that bishop is captured, it still leaves to a significant advantage for white. So if, for example, rook takes f1, rook takes d4, g5, again we can see the problem that the knight on f6 does not have many safe squares, so knight e4, and then simply rook takes a7. The king's still in this mating net, very comfortable position for Cheng, just being a clear exchange to the good. Alternatively, after bishop f1, we can play king takes, give up the rook, and then play g5. And we can see the point that it's all about, again, continuing with this mating net idea, and there's some very nice checkmate finishes from this position. For example, if knight h7, king g2, again threatening knight f3, so black's forced to give up a piece in this position to try and defend, and again this is going to be another comfortable position for Cheng, simply a clear piece up for a pawn. After g5, there's some other ideas here. If the king takes on h3, there's some very nice ideas here. Taking on f6, rook goes to f7, knight f3, obviously threatening a fork on g5. So rook takes f6, and then a very nice little maneuver here. Knight e5, rook takes f4, rook d3 check. Now if rook h4, rook to g3, obviously cutting off the squares for the king, we're threatening obviously knight takes g6 with checkmate, as well as threatening knight f3, which is going to force black to give up the exchange to avoid mate, and Ching will end up a rook up. So rook f6 defends that all, but simply king g2. And a very nice maneuver here to finish off the game if this was a possibility. d4 and then f4. So obviously if the rook takes, knight g6 is mate. If the rook doesn't take, then that f3 square is protected and knight f3 is going to be mate. So a potential very nice finish there. And alternatively, if rook h2, sorry, king h2 in that position, then another very nice idea. Same kind of thing again, rook g3, cutting off the king again, and we're simply going to play knight f3 and rook h3. So again, black's forced to give up the rook, and Ching would be clearly winning in that variation as well, being a rook ahead. However, returning to the game after knight d4, Henkin played h takes g4, and again another very calm manoeuvre by Ching, just recapturing the pawn. Obviously if the knight moves, or knight plays, say knight takes g4, then again check on the h file is going to be deadly. So Henkin tried rook takes e7, but then again another fantastic move, setting up that mating net f3. Knight takes on g4 and rook h1 check. So mate's unavoidable after knight h2. Rook takes h2. Fantastic win for Bobby Cheng, and potentially, I'd have to check my facts on this, but potentially the first time that a Grandmaster in the top 100 has been beaten in a tournament game on Australian soil. And I was actually there to capture the final moments when they signed their score sheet. So that's the closing moments to that historic game with Bobby Cheng beating Grandmaster Igor Henkin from Germany. Another very exciting clash in round 8 was the board 2 clash between local international masters Milton Lai and Max Illingworth. The game started off fairly relatively quietly with a English system, and after the opening moves it managed to transpose into a Maroczy-Blind Sicilian position. This is the type of position that if you've seen some of the earlier videos, someone like Junta Akita is very, very comfortable and familiar with. Max is obviously also very familiar with this position and these type of structures, but it's a type of position that Moulton seems to enjoy as well, having plenty of space and attacking opportunities. After some fairly standard moves here, black castles, and Moulton here plays pawn to f4, very aggressive move. Rook comes to e8, and then the pawn continues up the board with f5. Here Max played bishop f8, which is a common move in this position. However, I think if he'd known beforehand the general statistics of this position, he might have chosen to play the position somewhat differently. F takes e6, F takes e6 has all been seen before, and bishop h3. Knight c5, trying to defend that e6 pawn, but b4, simply forcing the knight to move. Taking on e4, and bishop e6. In fact, the more common move in that position is actually to take with the knight rather than the bishop. However, all games from this position are either won by white or drawn. In the database that I had a look up, there's only one other previous game with bishop takes e6, and this was answered with king h8. Max didn't play that move. He actually decided to give up the exchange here with rook takes e6. Knight captured, queen to d7, but the problem here for Max is that all the tactics really just don't work in his favour. The bishop on f8 is really out of the game. There's the weak pawn on the d file, and there's plenty of threats for Moulton, and plenty of good squares for his pieces to go to. Knight comes back to f4, b5 to prevent that pawn being taken. Moulton comes into d5, so threatening knight b6 this time. Takes on c4. Rook takes on c4 and queen e6. Trying to pin that knight so there's no sort of knight c7 ideas because of queen takes c4. Knight comes to b6 though, obviously attacking the rook in the corner but defending that rook on c4. Rook comes to b8 and that allows rook c7, so a very nice square for that rook on c7 on the 7th rank. Queen takes the pawn on e2, and again a very calm manoeuvre from Moulton here. Queen e2, he's very happy to trade off pieces with the rook on the 7th rank. We've got moves like knight d7 coming, which are going to be very, very strong. So obviously exchanging queens is going to be very good for Max, so he retreated to e6. The knight came to d7 anyway, and again this highlights the further problems that Max has in the position. Obviously if he moves the rook on b8, there's rook takes b7, and he tried knight c3, these sort of tactical type shots, but again another calm move by Moulton to try and swap off pieces. Queen c4, trying to again exchange queens, exploit the advantage that Moulton has in the position with being the exchange ahead, with the number of weak pawns, with the a6 pawn and d6 pawn being very weak for Max. Bishop d5 was tried by Max, obviously trying to avoid that swap of queens, but then knight takes f8, obviously taking a piece and threatening the queen. Queen h3 was tried. There's obviously the checkmate threat on g2, very easily stopped by queen f1, and again offering that trade of queens. Queen g4. The knight returned to e6, and again the various tactics work out nicely here for Moulton. Obviously if bishop takes e6, then the knight on c3 is attacked, and we're still definitely in a very advantageous position. Max tried queen takes e6, and a very nice tactic here to finish off. Rook takes g7 check. King takes, rook d4 check, not only obviously attacking the king but uncovering the rook on the e file. So king g8 captures the queen on e6, and then simply bishop takes c3, and being a queen for rook up with pawns that are about to drop off, as well as potential checkmating threats with queen f6 and queen g7, Max decided to resign. So very, very nice game there by Moulton. That put him well up the leaderboard in equal second place after that victory by Bobby to go to the outright lead. And some other games from round 8. This one is a game between young Zachary Lowe from Melbourne and FIDE master Dusan Stojic. Starts off as a fairly sort of typical sort of Benoni King's Indian type position, where White has obviously an early space advantage, and Black's trying to work on undermining that centre that's been set up. b5, a very thematic move in the position, and Zach counters by attacking in the centre with e5. Dusan takes on e5, and Zach captures the pawn on b5. Rook comes to d8, bishop to c4 to protect that d pawn. Knight c6, developing and trying to exploit the pin on the d file. So queen e2 to get out of that pin. Knight comes to b4, which maybe is not the best spot for that knight, although it does seem very natural to increase the pressure on the d pawn. The better move might have been knight a5, hitting the bishop on c4. And here a very nice little combination for Zach to get a bit more of an advantage in the position. Pawn to d6. Dusan captured, rook d1, queen retreated, trade of rooks, and then knight e5. So you can see Zach's pieces very active in the centre. We've got pressure against f7, so to try and stop that, bishop e6. Zach's happy to trade and leave Dusan with a weak e6 pawn, and then bishop takes c5, obviously again attacking that knight. Here Dusan really is forced to probably play a move like knight back to d5. He tried knight takes a2, but after simply knight takes a2, queen d5, b4. And here there's really only one way for Dusan to continue in the position. He really has to play a5, trying to undermine obviously that bishop on b4, bishop on c5, as well as trying to open up the file for the rook. So there's not really that many good moves. We've still got threats on g2, so for a move like knight c3, there's plenty of tactical opportunities with queen takes g2. So best for white is probably to castle, take on b4, take with the knight, and then return to d3, where white has a very comfortable position. Although there's no material advantage at this stage, the pawns on g6 and e6 are very, very weak for black, so white does hold an edge in this position. However, after b4, Dusan played knight e4. After knight takes g6, threatening obviously the knight fork on e7. King f7, the knight came to e7 anyway. Queen came to e5, and a very nice move from Zach to get out of any of these problems, just simply castles. Again, because of the dilemmas that Dusan finds himself in, he really has to, if he wants to keep playing, give up some material to try and stay in the game. So knight takes c5, it does allow queen f3 check, and then king takes e7, queen takes a8. And again, white's very comfortable material up. He's going to pick up the pawn on a7 as well after the knight moves. So that would lead to a very nice position for white. However, it would sort of prolong the game a bit more than what actually happened. Dusan tried bishop f6, and another very nice move, pawn to f4. The big problem for black is that the knight on e4, it's obviously only supported by the queen, and all the squares that the queen can go to where it can keep protecting the knight are all covered by the white pieces. So very, very nice move there by Zach. Dusan tried queen b2, but simply queen takes e4, hitting the rook in the corner. So after bishop takes e7, obviously if we don't take the knight on e7, then queen g6 is going to lead to mate. So bishop takes e7, rook takes a8, bishop takes c5, b takes c5, queen a2, pawn to c6. So Zach's just to clear a rook up with a passed pawn coming down the board, and after queen d5, queen takes a7, Dusan had enough. So very, very nice win there for young Zach Lowe. And finally, a interesting game here between Oscar Wang and Nick Kadahi, and very much a game of changing fortunes. Some 35 moves into the position, we see Oscar has a very, very dominating position with the knight on c7 in serious danger. We've obviously got that he's just played d takes e6, so we're threatening. We have threats against the f7 pawn as well to try and help defend that knight. Nick tried pawn to d5. Oscar simply captured on f7. Obviously, if he takes on f7, that's going to allow bishop takes d5, and more pieces are going to be brought into the attack. So he played king f8. f4, trying to dislodge the bishop from the diagonal. If it wants to stay on the diagonal and keep defending the knight, it has to go to d6, which allows bishop takes d5. Here Nick tried rook a8, which was really a fairly desperate attempt to complicate the position in what is otherwise a pretty lost cause here. Unfortunately for Oscar, he didn't play the best move, and the best move here is quite clearly queen c3. Just again, maintaining that pressure on c3, stopping the rook check on a1, as well as threatening a very, very nasty check on h8. And that move's really going to be very decisive. However, in that position, Oscar played another reasonable move. Bishop takes c7. Obviously, trading queens is going to be horrible for black with the f7 pawn sitting there. So bishop takes c7, and then again a slightly inaccurate move by Oscar. A better move here might have been queen c5 check. Again, this forces queen d6, and then simply rook takes c7. And after the queens are traded, you still have that protected pawn on f7. Clear exchange up, definitely with threats on the back rank. So the rook on a8 is forced to stay somewhere on the back rank to keep defending, and then you can simply bring the king up and help finish off the game. However, after taking on c7, Oscar played queen takes c7, which in itself is not a bad move. And here Nick tried the one last trick he sort of has in the position. Rook a1 check. Obviously there's a few different possibilities for getting out of check. King to g2 is obviously going to be bad, as queen takes d5 is actually going to allow black to win the game. So it's a choice between h2 and f2. Unfortunately for Oscar, he picked the wrong one, although he could have corrected his mistake a bit later, but chose not to. So the best defense here is simply king f2. And if rook a2 check, again, if bishop takes the rook immediately, then that's going to allow the queen to come in and a perpetual check. So the king can simply go back to f1, rook a1 check again, and then king e2. And now with d2 square covered, rook a2 check's not a threat, as the bishop can simply capture. The queen doesn't have any checks on the e-file, as both e8 and e7 are covered. So black's essentially lost in this position. Thankfully for Nick, and probably not so much for Oscar, he decided to play king to h2. And after rook a2 check, again here you can correct things and go back to that position by playing king back to g1, and then after king rook a1 check, go out to f2, and again get to that position where black runs out of checks. However, he tried bishop to g2, and a very nice little what was intended as a drawing technique here for Nick. Bishop takes g2 check. King has to take, queen d2, and we can see the problem for white now. Without the cover for the king, there's going to be a perpetual check. So he tried king f3, queen d3, and unfortunately for Oscar, or fortunately as it turned out, now he basically has to just go back to f2 and accept the perpetual check on the d file, queen d3, queen d1, and the like. He tried queen g4 here, and Nick, obviously not expecting this sudden turn of events, simply played queen f5. However, I think it would have been much worse for Oscar if Nick had found queen e2 check. The king here, obviously if it goes to h4, it's actually mate from queen h5, so that means that the king here has to go to g5. However, this is still mating for black. Queen h5 check, king has to go to f6, and queen f5 is actually mate. So that would have been quite the turn of events. However, after queen f5 check, the king returned to f3. Oscar very quickly offered a draw, seeing that he had his chance to get mated, and Nick accepted, realising that by this stage Oscar isn't going to go back to g4. So, and the type of finish that you sometimes see in these games where things can turn so very easily just on one inaccurate or poor move by both sides. But that's going to wrap up the round 8 review. Of course, if you're unable to follow the action at the venue, the best place to follow the tournament is on the official tournament website. You can see the link there, the Google site. The best place to get there is via the North Chess Club website and following the links there. NorthSydneyChess.org is the main page there. That's got all the games, the various pairings and results, as well as plenty of other information about the tournament. Or you can look at the updates on my blog, melbournegamescoach.blogspot.com. Hopefully you've enjoyed this video, and we'll see you for the next one. Thanks.